Welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, work, and more. For more information, please visit soberdadcrew.com. All right, my guest this episode is Derek English, Executive Director of the Ithaca Free Clinic in Ithaca, New York. He's also an out loud sober professional. We've got lots to talk about. But before we start, please like, subscribe, rate, all that good stuff. It really helps the podcast grow. And with that said, Derek, welcome to Sober Dad Crew.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to do this. And I like the out loud and sober intro there, because that is certainly true.
Yeah, I had this moment. I've told this story a few times on here when I was in the middle of applying for the job I have now in 2012, maybe. So I was like 12 years. It was my 12th sober anniversary, and I'd never really put anything up on LinkedIn or anything. And I put it up there, and I thought, oh, Jesus, I'm right in the middle of applying for this job. Like, what the hell am I thinking? I was talking to my wife, and then we were like, well, if they're going to be pissed about that, you probably don't want to work there. And that was, I've always sort of talked about it at work, but never really thrown it into that wider professional world. What was, your reasoning behind doing that?
So for me, my sobriety and my past history with both alcohol and drug use has actually always benefited my career. Right after I got sober, I worked a brief job moving furniture for a company up in Syracuse who owned student apartments. But I got a job after that at ACR Health, which is a harm reduction agency. So not only are they a harm reduction agency, I was actually a client there. They helped me get into rehab. They helped me get sober, and they practiced this really cool model of harm reduction, which I really liked. So as I got my job there, I got a little bit of sobriety under my belt. Not a lot, but a little bit. And I realized when I was drinking and using, I was so ashamed of who I was and how I turned out. I'm like, I can't believe I'm one of, and doing the quotation marks, those people. So for me, it was really important to be out loud with my sobriety so that people can see that, addiction, drug abuse, alcohol, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what you look like, your background, any of that. It can get at anybody. So I made a very conscious choice on my 1-year anniversary of being sober to come out very publicly on Facebook and, really announce my sobriety to the world, which wasn't so surprising to anybody who actually had known me the last 10 years, that I had some pretty serious issues with alcohol and drugs. So it wasn't like somebody's like, oh my God, he was using drugs. They're like, oh, it's about damn time. So that was kind of my story. And now, I do use it to my advantage everywhere I go. In applying for this job, I talked about it in my interview that I'm a person, I have lived experience around the delivery of services and, receiving services around drug and alcohol use. And I think, in my current role as an agency promoting health equity, you have to touch on those subjects.
100%. So if I'm remembering your LinkedIn profile, before you moved furniture, were you not an attorney?
Was an attorney, and and a big part of my flame out was around my drug and alcohol use. I couldn't maintain that type of work and also my lifestyle outside of work. So that was part of the shame that came along with it, as I couldn't understand how I went from, a fairly successful attorney to living out of my car and sleeping outside and, losing a bunch of jobs and cashing in my retirement. So that's where that shame came from. And I never wanted to be, again, those people. So, in order to really address that and come to terms with who I was, that's part of why I'm so public with it today.
Yeah, that's awesome. And let's touch on the free clinic a little bit too, because we have a sort of a funny intersect that you didn't know until I mentioned it to you. So your predecessor, Norb, who is 100% awesome, he and I was the other finalist when he was hired. And then he was hired and I met him and I'm like, oh, that was a good choice. It was an interesting moment in my life because I was really interested in that job. And I met him and I was like, that was a good choice. They shouldn't have chosen me. They should have chosen him. But the whole the interview process for that was like so nutty. Um,
Yeah,
so
Norv is he's an easy guy to like, and I could picture that scenario and like, oh yeah, no, it would be great that he got the job over me. So yeah, that's a fun little story. The interview process this time around, I don't know if it was nutty, but it certainly took a long time.
okay, yeah, it took a long time. I had to do this little public talk, and I was confused of being like really conservative looking. And then I like rolled up my sleeves, like my full sleeve tattoos. And I was like, well, you need both of these things. It was actually pretty cool. And then somebody also asked me if I was more hippie or punk rock, which was probably the best job interview question I've actually ever gotten. I loved that question.
Yeah, was I mean, just guessing, was that who asked that question? Was
I
it
think,
Anthony?
I don't remember.
We have one of our long-term volunteers is super punk rock, and you would not think it to look at him.
Yeah, it was enough years ago. I don't remember, but well, we digress. So Ithaca Free Clinic, it's for those who don't know Ithaca, it's on the west side of the city, which, I mean, Ithaca is not a big city, but it's in the intersect of really the comings and goings, a lot of the unhoused population. I'm in an area that has gotten national press due to unfortunate events and a murder that was written about in the New York Times called The Jungle. So you kind of intersect those worlds, but I think also the world of just fucked up health insurance in America and people who are underinsured. So can you kind of just talk about the clinic and its mission and who you serve?
Right. So we serve predominantly persons who are not only underinsured, but uninsured in general. So, you're talking about perhaps the people who the jungle has unfortunately been cleared out. But, that's our target demographic. We want to hit those people who cannot get services anywhere else, who are falling through even all of the other safety net cracks. Because what this does, from a values point, from my standpoint, like, we need to be out helping. Like, we are the richest country in the world, and I don't understand why we cannot provide basic services, healthcare, food, housing to all of our citizens. So, that's where I'm coming at it from. I'm coming at it as we really need to be out here helping. But from a purely logistical and financial standpoint as well, it is so much cheaper to provide preventative services than it is to provide treatment later on. So, we're hoping this model, and it has been replicated across the country, is we do not charge for services. Even if somebody has Medicaid or insurance, we don't bill. They come in, they get their services, they get treated with dignity and respect, and then, they can go about their day. All of our providers are volunteer providers. We have 3 full-time staff, 2 outside of myself, and, a fairly small operating budget, but we can really impact a lot of people. Roughly 60% of all the patients we see do not have health insurance of any kind. Almost all of our patients are at or below the federal poverty line. So, that's really our demographic. And as a result, due to, systemic inequities and systemic racism, a lot of our patients are from Black and Brown communities as well.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's a good summary. And I don't know if you've seen an uptick yet since January, when the Trump administration came into power and started basically going scorched earth on things. But I'm imagining if you haven't, you will.
We are absolutely going to see an uptick of patients, and I'm fully prepared for that. Even today, we believe we signed up 7 or 8 new patients, which is a pretty big day for us to sign up new patients. A lot of those cuts are affecting other agencies as well. And one of the things is we don't take federal money here at the clinic, but we do take a lot of community money. And now there are more people and more agencies reaching out for that community money because their federal dollars have been cut. So it's creating this situation in which a lot of great agencies, and Ithaca has a lot of great agencies out doing a lot of great work, are now all competing for a dwindling pot of money. So that's one completely anticipated consequence if you know where you're looking. But I think that's something that people are not aware of. Yes, we're going to see a ton of people lose Medicaid. probably upwards of 5% of people on Medicaid are going to lose it in the next 4 years. So that is certainly going to affect, how many people we're seeing here. I'm already preparing to expand clinic hours if need be to make sure that we can serve the growing population of uninsured residents.
Yeah, I also would guess, Ithaca hasn't had tons of ICE activity, but it's been there, and now we're on the sanctuary city list, the bad kids list who are doing good things. So I wonder if that, will impact your, Spanish speaking populations that come in there out of fear that ICE is going to just start camping out.
I could see how that would be fearful. And it's funny you brought this up because I've already talked to my board about this. So I'm free to say what I'm about to say. We support sanctuary cities. We do not give a shit about your immigration or resident status as far as who you're being served. And I can assure you that so long as I breathe air, ICE will not be coming through our door and getting our records. We are in a safe city, and this is certainly a safe agency within that safe city. I know there has been ICE activity in this area. I've trained my staff on how to lock the door. And, as my background as a former lawyer, I will make sure that if they are attempting to come in, they're doing so following every letter of the law. I don't know how many Spanish speaking people are going to be hearing this, but I want them to know that they are safe here. They will be protected here and they can receive health care here.
Yeah, it's just such an important message right now. Little pivot of the people that come to the clinic, what, sort of roughly what percentage are employed, right? That they have jobs, but these jobs don't offer health insurance, which are still a lot of jobs, even though, we were trying to fix this, in the Obama administration and some of that got dismantled. But I'm guessing, it's a pretty high percentage of people who are working.
It is a fairly high percentage. I don't have the exact numbers, but I probably to a quarter to a third of the people are what you consider working poor. And there's lots of gaps in health insurance. There is that income level that you don't quite qualify for Medicaid, but you certainly cannot afford $1,500 a month for even the most basic, healthcare package through the marketplace. And then there's our older population who are kind of in that in between area before they're on Medicare, but after they're off Medicaid and can't go get services anywhere else. 40% of the patients we serve are over age 60.
Yeah. Do you guys do mental health services there too? Because that's a huge, like just yesterday, I was like, I think it's time for me to get another therapist, work on some of my stuff. And I have a good job. And my wife's employed. She actually is a therapist. And I was like, okay, amazingly contacted somebody. Like the first step is I actually connected with somebody who it felt like a match and had a potential opening. And then we had the health insurance question because
So,
he's like $130 an hour
right.
without like, I got a kid going to college, like that's on some levels for me, 130 bucks isn't that much, right? I mean, for some people, that's a massive amount, but there's this sort of mental health gap too that exists.
So we are not currently offering mental health services. That's been traditionally a very hard program to get started. But I am currently working on some new ideas, and you are married to a therapist and I'm partnered with a therapist and she's wonderful. And I'm sure we could share a whole bunch of stories about, what it's like to be partnered with therapists and having to work on yourself so much.
Yeah.
It's been a good thing. Don't get me wrong, but, it's a pretty high level of accountability, but she's been really instrumental in helping me brainstorm some ideas of way to get mental health treatment in here, because that is a hugely underserved market. And, as you mentioned, 130 might not be enough for us, but this is basic healthcare. Why does any basic healthcare cost $130? Like,
Right.
why should it be that much? Why, aren't there better systems out there in order to make sure that, therapists, they deserve to get paid their money, but like, why is it so expensive to get the service? So
And a lot just don't get, my wife's paneled on like everything. And then I think works for free sometimes. Like she does a lot of trauma work, PTSD work, and a lot with like the trans community. So she's, doing a lot of like really incredible work. Uh, and she's paneled on everything. And it's so hard to get paneled. And, but she's I mean, she's amazing and she's highly ethical, and that's why she does it. Not saying other therapists aren't ethical, but I understand why they just don't panel, because it's difficult.
Oh yeah, it's horribly difficult. And then working with insurance companies is not fun, and reimbursement rates are really low. And you look, insurance companies slash reimbursement rates year after year, and then rake in net profits year after year. So I don't see how that lines up. But they're driving therapists out of the market essentially. They make it very hard to practice their craft, and therapists by nature and by training are social workers. They spend a long time going to school, learning how to help everyone, only to be faced with these huge barriers coming from insurance companies and other regulatory bodies.
Yeah. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into sort of your recovery story. I always say to the extent that people are comfortable, but kind of take us back, you know, when like I didn't really drink in high school. And it was like after college into adulthood that I really developed my issue with alcohol. So, and I've done 66 episodes now. Every story is a little different. There's some people who are, man, I was 12 and I had that first sip in the world, and like they found their new best friend. So, what's your kind of story?
So I am that person. My sobriety date is November 2nd, 2017. My first drink was at 10 years old. So I am one of those people. And it
I
was,
mean, you hit double digits at least.
yeah, I made it to double digits. I'm coming up on my longest ever sobriety stretch once I hit 10 years sober. That's longer than my childhood. But yeah, it was instantaneous. I picked up that drink and drank alcoholically from the first time. And, my comfort level with sharing my stories quite high. I actually just spoke at another recovery event that was public down here a couple weeks back. And I do talk about this part of it because, it is important to know. So my first drink was at 10. I started smoking pot at 12, and then kind of balanced out. I drank heavily all through high school and college, but a lot of the harder stuff didn't come until later. And, you know, I, I'm an AA guy. I do that. So when I tell my story, I focus around alcohol at AA, but like drugs are an absolute huge part of my story and a huge part of my downfall. And, you know, I, I didn't ever change my lifestyle. I always just thought it was manageable and cool and fun. And then you kind of know how that is. You're like, yeah, this is fine. This is fine. I have control. Then all of a sudden, like, you don't. And you look back and you're really far down the tunnel, and the light at the end of the tunnel is a really, really long ways off, and you don't know how you got there, because it isn't just, one day you take a drink and the next day you're homeless. It comes very slowly, and you have these a lot of lines that you're like, you weren't willing to cross before, but you do this time. And it's a slow progression, and it's so slow that you don't even notice it. And I remember, when it got to the point where I noticed it, I was so far past the point of like doing anything about it myself, that I needed rehab, but I was so scared to go based on what my job was. So it was tricky, and it took a lot of pain and suffering on my part, before I was able to get to a point where I wanted to get sober for me. And we don't have enough time to go through the whole history, but I do know what my turning point was. Is it was after my second rehab. I tried the geographical switch, and I moved to a small town in upstate New York called Saranac Lake. I'm like, if I can just hide in the mountains, I'll never drink or drug again. And I did. And I found myself being evicted from the apartment I had up there. And at 32 years old, I moved back home with my parents. And that lasted 3 weeks, 4 weeks before they had made like the decision. My disease was making them sick at this point, and causing problems in their marriage. It was, you know as every true alcoholic, I was ruining everyone's life around me, and the closer you were to me, the more pain I was inflicting on you. So they threw me out, which, best idea ever. I give them a lot of credit for making the hard call, because that hard call also saved my life, because so long as I was living at home or felt like I could keep going, I would have. So this was I'm sure a very hard decision for them, and it was the absolute best decision that they could have made. So I ended up in Pittsburgh. I was, couch surfing at that time, with somebody I had met in rehab before, and we had no power. We were in the apartment we were living. It was typical stuff. And I remember one day I was walking across a very high bridge, and it was over the Allegheny River in a little town outside of Pittsburgh called Etna. And I got like out to the middle of this bridge. I was on my way to go pick up, and I stopped and I just looked over that bridge, and I, realized at that moment I had two choices. I could either throw myself off that bridge, or I could make a conscious decision to not live this way anymore, because I always thought I would die. I always thought that the drugs and alcohol would kill me and I wouldn't have to worry about things anymore. And it came to this point where I wasn't dying. I had not overdosed. I had not drank myself to death. I was not having severe health problems. And I got to that point, and then I realized I wasn't able to actively throw myself off that bridge. So I really had one choice left, and that was actual recovery. So at this point, um, I went and picked up that day, but I called rehab the next day, and I called them every day for the next like 2 weeks until they sent a van to come get me. And that was November 2nd, 2017, when they came to get me. I went into rehab. I was there for 31 days, and I came out of rehab still homeless. And I had not a slightest idea of what I wanted to do or where I was going to go. And I ended up back in Syracuse after, bouncing around for a little bit. That's when I started going to AA, and I did my outpatient, and I got into a sober living house. And, from there I was able to put some things back together in my life, and then got an opportunity to go work at ACR, who was, instrumental in getting me into my second rehab. And, the story kind of writes itself from there. But I always preface this and end this with like, my recovery is my own. I choose my abstinence-based recovery. It really works for me. And even though this is not a video, your listeners will want to know that I am a white straight male. So I've had a lot of privilege thrown my way. So my recovery was, I put in the work, but I had privilege going for me that whole time. So I was able to get back into the workforce. I was able to do some things, and not every recovery looks the same. When I was working at ACR, I really learned that some people, like, they don't want what I want out of recovery, and it's not fair to them for me to force my views of recovery on them.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good place to kind of talk about harm reduction, because that's it. I guess controversial is a fair word. I mean, my theory is dead people don't get better, right? Like, if you get off of IV drug use and smoke weed, maybe some people wouldn't define that as sober, but you're probably pretty hard to OD on weed unless it's laced with something. So, like, let's get into harm reduction a little bit and your thoughts.
Yeah, so I worked for a harm reduction agency. I do love it. And I hold almost these dichotomous views where, like, for me, I need abstinence. If I smoked a joint this afternoon, I would be burning my apartment building down this evening. That's just how my usage is. So that's me. Me needs abstinence. But I, worked for an agency where harm reduction was our mission. And at one point, harm reduction did save my life. I was an IV drug user who wasn't super interested in stopping, but I was able to go to a syringe exchange at ACR in Syracuse and at least get some food and get some supplies that kept me healthy. So I never did end up with any abscesses. I never ended up with Hep C. I never ended up with HIV, because I was able to access clean and free, needles all the time. So that's, for me, what harm reduction was. And it created this place where I could go and feel safe. So when you're living the lifestyle I was living, like, I didn't feel safe going to a doctor. I didn't, want to go to the hospital. I got judged and stigmatized so often that I'm like, why bother? I'd rather just not. But I went to a harm reduction agency, and they're like, yeah, come on in, let's sign you up. Oh, well, you're skinny. Let's get you some food. Here's some Gatorade, and they made me feel really welcome. And that's what, like, really helped with my sobriety, because I went in there one day and I felt safe enough to ask for help. I did not want to keep living the way I was living. It was a hard way to live. And rather than like judge me or criticize me, they just said, sure, yeah, we'll help you. And they signed me up to to send me to rehab. And they said, your van will be here, in a week. We'll let you know. And I left that day, and they must have called that day, and I ignored their call. They sent me a text like, their van's coming. And I, by then, had a change of heart. I'm like, I don't want rehab. I don't want this. But they put in all this work, and they never pressured me or judged me. So I ended up going. And I did not stay sober after that rehab, but I did, as I mentioned, end up back at that rehab later on. And yeah, that's where the story is. So for me, harm reduction really is a method in which you keep someone alive long enough that they get to pick their version of recovery.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And, I think most of the guests on here are abstinence based. And I mean, certainly for me, I've actually never smoked pot. It was only alcohol, and I just stopped. And that works for me. We're a totally sober house. My wife's in recovery too. We had a sober wedding, and that really is the right choice for us. It's the best choice for our kids, to see that. But also, I have a 22-year-old, he's almost 22. He'll have a beer, right? So it's also important for them to understand, some people can have a beer. Just some people can't.
Right. Yeah. I fall squarely into that camp. And, I'm glad you mentioned the kids, because it is the sober dad crew. And I have a blended family. I have two stepsons, and then my son and daughter. They range from like 12 to my son's almost 6 now. And not a single one of them has ever seen me pick up a drink or a drug. But also, I recognize that society is what it is. And, I want to make sure that I don't make it so taboo that they want to run out and do it. Because when I was 13, if you told me not to do something, that was then going to be at the top of my list of things I was going to do.
It is a green light for most 13-year-olds. And we just, because so I have ages 9 and 13, technically my stepkids, but really just my kids. And then an 18-year-old, and like I said, my oldest son. And the 13-year-old, our mom was just sort of given the talk about, this is fentanyl and this is this and this. And we recognize the way we parent, and our kids do. Like, a lot of parents don't parent the way we parent, and really, like, it's all on the table. You want to talk about it, we will talk about it. Did you always want to be a dad?
No. I wanted no responsibility for anyone but myself for most of my life. So, yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I started, that alcoholic behavior probably right when I was born, but it really got triggered at 10 of my first drink. So I acted very alcoholically from them. I was so incredibly self-centered and selfish and only focused on me. I couldn't imagine having to be responsible for anybody else. So that was not on my bingo card. But then I got sober, and I got into a relationship with the person I'm no longer with, and she had a daughter, and then we had another kid together. So I've raised those two as my own until my current partner. Wouldn't change anything about it. Love having kids. I love being the dad part, because, now that I'm in recovery, I get to explore this whole new side of myself. This generous, loving side of myself that I, was always there, but probably just drowning in alcohol for many years. This feels more natural to me. So it's one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I've had some really good things in my life happen to me. But the dad thing is like one of the best. And like this summer, like I want to doing the Clark Griswold family vacation, where we're taking everybody to the Outer Banks, and we're piling all these kids into one car for a 10-hour drive. And,
Just don't tie the dog to the bumper.
Oh my God, I'm going to, and it's, if you've driven that far with that many kids, you might want to tie yourself to the bumper sometimes, because it gets loud. But
it's not always for the faint of heart. Yeah, we're doing an addition on our house, and we're like, oh wait, we're just moving the 13-year-old next to our new room. Is this a good idea? I don't know. I love her dearly. How's the blending going? I mean, blending is tricky.
It is tricky, and I love it. It's great. I mean, when you have wonderful kids, I think that really makes it easier. And all of the kids get along so well. And my partner's boys are like the absolute just best big brothers to my kid. It's like amazing to watch and, see how quickly everybody, adjusted and just fell in with each other. It's like really special to watch. Not to say it doesn't come out challenges every day, but I got really lucky to have a partner who's super great with my kids, super supportive of building our relationship and our lives together. So I think probably I just fell into like a really good situation around that.
Yeah, I think we were really fortunate too. I mean, there's like always little bumps and you navigate them, but we always talk about in our relationship and we met during COVID, so we had the relationship is built on intentionality, right? Like the notion of the first kiss in a pandemic is like super different than any other time. So, we went on walks, right? Which was very old school and very great. But the whole foundation is like intentional actions and communication. And I think that really like created this foundation when the kids met and also the way our larger family just embraced everybody. It's just like we're just one big family. Like we just had my 18-year-old's birthday party at our house Sunday. Her mom was there with her partner and their kid. It was like we're just all in it, like one big old wacky family, with like a lot of love and a little bit of chaos, or sometimes a lot of chaos. But yeah, and the other thing, even in that divorce, was like kids first, right? Like you have to look at their needs and explore those, because it's probably outside of divorce in any situation that you sort of have to look at your kids and see what their needs are, and it's your job to like meet their needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, divorce and separation is not easy for anyone, especially the kids. So I think, we did take special care the best we could to shield the kids from all of that. And I think it's paid off. But like everything, there are hard moments in co-parenting. There are hard moments in blending. But there are those chaos moments. But as long as the love is always there, it really does make a difference. And I love what you said about the intentionality. My partner, she's great, but she was intentional dating. So when she sits down to listen to this, she's gonna, probably poke me in the ribs and go, "See, I told you," because that was her big thing, and I didn't have a lot of that language or that knowledge when her and I started dating. It was a little after the pandemic, but yeah, it's really great to hear that. That'll make her happy to hear that as well.
Yeah, well, and I think sometimes, and it is this notion of sort of sobriety and recovery, like looking holistically at your life, because a lot of times you'll stop whatever drinking, but like I became like an exercise nutcase, you know, and like hurt my knees from running so much. Probably the macro of that was good, but it's easy to transfer sort of addictive behaviors, and people can do that into relationships too. So I think, I mean, I'm a therapy based sort of recovery person, but having some 12-step program or therapist or something that you dig into the bigger issues behind why you're using or abusing substances, I think is super important, especially if you're trying to build some relationship, and super especially if kids are intersecting in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I needed, I did therapy. I had a recovery counselor. I did outpatient. I do my 12-step meetings to this day. I'm still active in that. Because I do, need an outlet, not just a distraction. So during COVID, a lot of recovery shifted online. You focus more time there. And so I found myself on forums where people are like, I don't know what to do. And everyone's like, oh, just distract yourself. I'm like, until what? That's not a permanent solution. Like, for me at least, I need to actually like have recovery based activities. Therapy was great. Therapy is great for everything. Everyone should go. That's why it should be free. Everyone should have to go. But working through the steps and really doing that deep dive is really beneficial because it helps me slow down. It helps me think. It helps me process. And I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be defensive. So in order to not be these things, I have to continually be doing the work.
Yeah, and I think the other piece is that community piece, right? Having a community around you that holds you up and holds you accountable um, is super important.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it is. And you notice that during COVID is like once, you lost that community, it became harder. And I find myself like, I got isolated during COVID as we all did. And it's been harder sometimes to rebuild some of those friendships and those connections.
Yeah, that's really true. I mean, I had my kids half time, at that point. So there was really a week at a time. Sometimes it was me and a cat, and I was working from home. You would run into the grocery store and run out. It was yeah, you had so much time. There's like so much weird dead time because, I mean, I sort of worked a ton because, like, what else was I going to do? And then you're like, well, I already watched the Star Trek reruns. So, I mean, that was a period that was so difficult for a lot of people in recovery. And, New York then decided, like, alcohol was an essential service, which was maybe okay. So people weren't just not getting it and having seizures and withdrawal, but it was a little weird to be like takeout cocktails. Seemed like a very strange healthcare
Yeah.
decision.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of strange decisions made back then. And I do get it. Like, um, alcohol never did anything to me that I didn't ask it to do. So alcohol has never once been like the problem. My relationship with it has always been the problem. So
Yeah. How dare you, beer, do that to me last night? I
right,
can't.
like and I say the same thing about people, places, locations. Like I've never been walking down the street and have like a beer bottle fly up into my hand, and I get the disease aspect of it, and I fully embrace that. But like I believe that like yeah, other people don't have problematic relationships with alcohol like I do. So I got to a point where I stopped noticing so much what was going on in the alcohol world, but I did find it interesting and a bit strange that it was deemed an essential service. But you're right. If somebody all of a sudden didn't have it, what could happen to them? So yeah, COVID was an interesting time for all of that stuff. I at the time the person I was, married to at the time, she was also sober. So that was, I guess, easier is that we had that built-in support. But yeah, I am glad we're no longer in that scenario, and I could go back to in-person meetings and be out in the community a lot more. I find for my recovery that giving back to the community has been really helpful, and kind of tying that all back to where I'm at now. Like I get to do these things as a result of my sobriety. I get to lead this amazing agency into its next chapter, especially with all that's going on in the world. Is I get to be a frustrated father sometime who feels like overwhelmed with his kids, because I tell you what, I wouldn't have got to do that without my sobriety. So even the hard things are things I get to do rather than things that are happening to me. And if I can always keep it framed that way, life is a lot easier.
Yeah, I think that's a really healthy viewpoint. I mean, one of my grandmothers and really the person, even though she had passed, that I attribute to my decision to stop, is I really feel like one night she sort of came down and tapped me on the shoulder and was like, "You are going in the wrong direction," and I literally just stopped that night and just stopped drinking. But she always talked about being greatly blessed. And, that's that philosophy of even when things are hard, remember your blessings. And that's just, I mean, I have that tattooed on my arm. I mean, I carry that with me because for me, it's when things are hard. It's also a reminder of my white heterosexual privilege, too, that, hard things for me are much less hard than they are for many, many, many other people, especially right now. And that also pushes me towards like why I have to be community involved and why I do this podcast. But, when your kids driving you crazy, I'm blessed to just have these kids and this incredible family and a job and all that stuff. So there is some mindset shift for me in sobriety because there's also anxiety and depression early on. And I was sort of like, oh, the world is against me and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And then I remember I got sober and I got an antidepressant. I remember I was walking, like it was on Cuga Street, it was near the Commons. And I had this moment of like, oh, like I remember myself now. Like I remember this sort of punk nerdy guy with a good sense of humor. Like I'm back. I felt like literally felt like I was back.
Right. And I agree. It is that mindset. And I know there's people out listening. They're like, oh, easy for you to say, like, just, oh, it's all great. Like, not to say that it's an easy mindset to get in. It's fucking hard. It is hard, when shit is going wrong all around you to remember how lucky you are. And I don't think anybody ever does that perfectly. And if they do, I'll take lessons from them. But, as I sit here today in a pretty good spot in the day, a pretty good spot in my life, not without challenges, not without drawbacks, not without hard moments, but I can sit back in this moment go, yeah, these are all things I get to do. My partner and I are buying a house. We're in the process of trying to buy a house. It is a hard market out there right now.
Oh, I'm sorry for that. It is the reason we put the addition on, because when we started looking at a bigger house, we're like, this is crazy.
Right. And it is, and it's frustrating, and it's sometimes it is. Why is this happening to me? And then I can look back and go, hey, asshole, 8 years ago, you were living out of your car. 8 years ago, you were parked on the thruway rest stop because you had nowhere else to go. Like 8 years ago, 8.5 years ago, 7.5 years ago, you weren't able to shower because you didn't have anywhere with running water. So I guess, it's a stressful situation, but stably housed right now. I still am with my partner. We still get to see each other all the time. So I even now, this whole podcast is helpful for me because it gives me an opportunity to remind myself of, where I'm at now as opposed to where I used to be. And also if I put some good energy out there, hopefully I get some good energy back about this housing stuff.
Yeah, totally. And I also feel like it to me at 15 years, I don't feel temptation. Like I look around at my life. I mean, my wife and I just will look at each other and say, we have a beautiful life, and like we would not be together were it not for our separate sobrieties, 100%. And even if we had met at this other time, we wouldn't have been. I was talking to my 13-year-old the other night, and I said, somehow the universe or God or whatever you want to call it, like put us together. They put this family together for a reason. And, I'm usually not so like cosmic spiritual, but I really believe that that's true. In all this wide world of everything, somehow I intersected with my wife. Uh, Sometimes it feels miraculous.
Yeah, it really does. It's crazy to think how everything had to come together just right to, be at that moment in time with that person. I met, my partner online. I was doing the online dating thing and I had given up. I'd been online dating for like too long at this point, and I'd like given up and I deleted all my accounts. And then one day I'm like, I'm going to give this like one more quick chance. I'm going to do 30 days and then I'm out of here. And within like 2 days, I met her, and you know it was just the absolute right timing to be there because she was there at a point where I came back and we connected and had an amazing first date, and then the next day had an amazing second date, and the next a week later had an amazing third date. We were very early on, like we knew right away. And it just the timing had to be exactly right for that. So call it spirituality or whatever floats your boat on that, but something brought us together at just that right time. It sounds like you had a pretty similar experience.
Yeah, we met online too, and I was like the last try my wife was gonna do, and she's like, "Fuck this."
Yeah,
Because I think legitimately, online dating is much worse for women because men can just be total assholes and are just mean and crude. When when I talk to my female friends about some of their online dating experiences, it's pretty gnarly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can't imagine it's super great for anybody. I know it like took a toll on my mental health to feel some level of rejection over time.
Yeah,
But
it is a weird it's a weird process because it's also like kid in the candy store a little bit too,
right,
right?
right.
So you're just like, maybe the next one, maybe that it's actually very good for addictive behavior.
Yeah, yeah. It's exactly that swiping and the whole thing. So luckily, I don't have to worry about that ever
I
again
know.
if all goes
Amen to
well,
that.
so you know, um, but yeah, it was again though, like wouldn't have had any of that without my sobriety. So it's funny just to like look back and I remember at our first date, like, my partner is not sober. She is one of the, majority of the population that can have like a glass of wine or, whatever and be fine. And we were on our first date and my sobriety came up because we were at a restaurant and she ordered a drink. I'm like, I'm okay. And she's like, she's very intuitive. The
You got
therapist,
a therapist on you.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You knew
So
what you're in then.
she's like, hey, let's talk
So,
about it. Yep. Yeah.
how do you
So
feel about me having a drink?
yeah, we got that out of the way on the first date, which was fun. And I got to say, she has been like incredibly respectful and mindful of my sobriety and so supportive. And I can't understate how important that is, to go through hard things and have just that ride or die along with you. And I'm so lucky to have
Oh,
that.
yeah.
So it's been great. And, I've like you, I don't temptation is something that I haven't felt in a long time because even if I could drink and drug safely, I would have no interest in doing it at this point. It just I got it all out of my system. There I drank every last drop that I needed to. And, if somebody could wave a magic wand over me and say, you will never have another negative consequence from alcohol, I still wouldn't drink. It's not a part of my life any longer.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important lesson for people who are sort of early on, and it is that one day at a time, or just like it's hard early. That it does get better and it does get easier, and you build new habits and you kind of rewire your brain and retrain your actions. I mean, it's why I'm sort of very pro meditation and some of those elements. I mean, refuge recovery is a great avenue for people who you know might not totally feel the AA vibe. You got to find what works for you. I mean, I think is the key thing, and that goes a little bit into the harm reduction too. Like, what works for you to have a beautiful life?
And I mean, I think there are so many options out there. Dharma recovery, which is kind of like an offshoot of refuge recovery. Then you have SMART, which is, this really scientific CBT approach to it. And then you have your outpatient therapy, you have your inpatient rehabs. Like you have all of these different options these days, which I think makes it more inclusive and more easier to access. And that's great. There's still some huge barriers, including long wait lists at rehab and, having a lot of these services not covered by insurance and the stigma, the stigma that is the biggest barrier for anyone accessing care. Is there's still this huge misconception and misperception around the country of what alcoholics look like and what people who use drugs look like. And I went through this with my own family, and this is not to knock them, this is just to say like it's a really hard thing. And they wanted to differentiate between me and other people who use drugs. I'm like, no, I'm the same. You're right, like
Yeah,
I'm just the same. And I get it, I'm your son, you don't want to think of me like that. But that's how it is. And every time I do some other speaking events, and I love doing speaking events, let me put it that way, and I always ask people, I'm like, what does a person who used drugs look like to you? And there is no wrong answer to this. I want to hear everybody's opinion. And I get all sorts. And there are people like, yeah, it's the guy who lives under the bridge and has scabs and, and picking his face and, is 80 pounds. And I'm like, sure, sure, sure. And then, I go around the room. And then if I'm in a non-recovery related event, which I've spoken at before, then I tell my story. I'm like, and me, like, I am a person that, used IV drugs for a very long time. And it's good to put that, like, a face like that to that. So it, kind of reduces the stigma. I like to, work so that some people might not have ever met someone who is using IV drugs. They might have, they believe all the things they see in the media about that. So I think it's really good to put a face to it and to, you know, be out loud with my recovery so that other people might feel safer about their own recovery.
Yeah, it's been interesting in sort of our more professional worlds. Like I've had people on LinkedIn reach out to me, colleagues, and they're not public about it, which is also that is also 100% somebody's choice. Like
Oh
you have
yeah.
to decide what, your comfort level is. But I think even for them to know, oh right, there's other people out there who are kind of saying the thing. I think it just is really important to put that face on it because I think people drive around the cities, right, and they do have this stereotype about what it looks like, and it's not the two of us, it's not most of my guests. Some of them were those folks, right, and that's the other side of that is recovery is possible, right? Even I mean, I interviewed one guy who literally was living under a bush, you know, and that's pretty, that's about to the edge as you can get. Or people who are suicidal. There is a way back, and I think it's our job also to make sure, and you know, your job very specifically is creating opportunities for people to get that health care. But it's, really our job as people in recovery to advocate for these programs to exist because there's not enough recovery beds anywhere. There's not enough strong mental health access, especially if you're a young person. If you're an adolescent in need of mental health services, like good luck. It is super hard to find therapists. So, like, as publicly folks in recovery and advocates for recovery mental health, it's super important for us to really, and probably even more important in this time we live in, to push and advocate for, people to get access to these services.
Right. I absolutely agree. And I'm in a situation where I am able to speak up, and that makes it a lot easier to speak up. I can talk about my past and not worry about job security. My friends and family are all intimately aware of, my issues. So to be honest, I don't take a lot of risk when I speak publicly. I've been doing it a long time, and I have found that the more public I am, the better it is for me. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people out there who are in a different situation. They can't speak publicly about their recovery. And that's, I think, part of what I'm trying to change, at least too, is like, why are we, judging someone's past so vigorously, like that they are at risk of losing their job because they're in recovery 10 years? Like that is it's fucked up. It's a messed up system. So, the more I can speak publicly, and on my LinkedIn, I am, connected with other executive directors and high level people across all systems, and I'm public on my LinkedIn about it. I was public in my job interview about it. When I'm writing a grant, I put that in there as part of like the grant application as, yeah, this agency is being led by a person with lived experience. And, it scores higher on a grant. So, because I am able to do this without taking a risk, it is really important to be as public as I can. And again, I am in a situation where I'm also supported, 100% outside of my job. I have an amazing partner who, supports me doing this and is proud of me for doing this. I have parents who like are proud of me for doing this and support me in doing this. And, my kids got to see me speak for the first time a couple of weeks ago. And that's really cool. So again, I get to do these things, and it's all because of the support I have outside of here.
Yeah, and I think beyond even sort of, alcohol and drug related recovery, just being public about past struggle, like in the workplace, I think it actually makes me a better employee because I'm resilient. But it also gives the opportunity for someone whose, marriage might be struggling or has had issues with eating disorders or whatever it is to create this understanding that people just struggle. It is part of the human condition to struggle in life sometimes. So if we can create an environment, and I'm really lucky to have a workplace that's supportive like that. Like when my mom, who's really in late stage dementia now, a year and a half ago, ended up in the hospital, and the head of the company was like, if you need to go right now, you go. We got you. You don't even blink. You just go. Like, and that is super privileged, and I'm super fortunate. But that's the kind of world and environment I'm hoping that by being out loud about struggle, we can help create that in more places.
Absolutely. And that kind of, all of that leads me to think of like, and as men, especially, and this is the Sober Dad podcast, a lot of men, especially our age and older, have been conditioned by society, by their parents, to never talk about their struggles. Men's mental health is like a burgeoning, brand new type of thing because it was just not addressed for so long. Because, we carry over some of these old stereotypes from before that men need to be the strong, silent type and carry everything inside. And you look at suicide rates, and by and large, men are the only people committing suicide. It's because, men don't know how to speak out about their problems. So, even modeling that type of behavior for another man who might be struggling, like, it's okay. They need to know that it's okay to get therapy. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to be depressed. It doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a bad father. It doesn't make you any of those things. You need to be able to have your release, to go to therapy, to not feel judged by that. And I think, the more men out there talking about their struggles with mental health, with, anything, it will only help ease that burden on other men when they seek help.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's an awesome note to end on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was great being here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. Sober Dad Crew is a DIY project by Stephen Kimball, who writes, edits, and produces the show. To support the show, please review it where you listen to podcasts or visit SoberDadCrew.com to buy some merchandise or make a donation.